Hi, thanks for tuning in to Front Porch Conversation here at Advent Christian Village. This morning we're on the porch at the Copeland Community Center, and it sounds like it's going to be a lovely day. I want you to welcome with me our guest today, Dollie Register. Dollie, good morning.
Good morning to you, Ann, and to you guys. They're not supposed to be there, are they?
They're there. It wouldn't be anything if they weren't there, except a nice conversation.
I don't know what you need me to tell you.
I need you to tell me where you live.
I live in Riverwoods at the Advent Christian Village for 24 years.
Gosh, well, we'll get back to more about that story. But would you share with our visitors where you grew up and a little bit about your early childhood?
Well, I was born and raised in McClenny, Florida, on a 40-acre farm that my daddy's folks owned at the time that I was born. But then my mama's folks owned it at first, and then when my mama's folks decided to move to town, my daddy's folks bought it, and then my daddy bought it from them. So, and now one of my nephews live there.
So it's been in the family a long time.
It's been in the family all these years. My oldest brother, until he died 4 years ago, and his wife built a house there. 3 of their children live there. My middle brother has 4 children, and he and those 4 children live on that property. My baby brother has 2 children. One lives in St. Petersburg, and one lives in Atlanta. And my children don't live there. My daughter lived there for a while on that property, but she lives in McClenny.
In downtown McClenny?
No, she lives in Glen St. Mary. She lives in the house that George and I lived in, or the property. We had 10 acres there, and she didn't like our old farmhouse, so she did the craziest thing, although it turned out good. She tore our old house out from under the building and built her a new house right there in the same place. And of course, my baby son lived here and passed away last year. He has 4 children. And then I have a son that lives in Melbourne, Florida. And then I have 2 stepsons that live in Georgia. One is a Baptist minister, lives in Pitts, Georgia. And the other one lives in Ellaville. My son that lives in Pitts is a Baptist minister, and the other one, Dwayne, has retired, and he just does what everybody in the neighborhood wants him to do. Good kids. They're like my own. Their mama has died, and we just been a big family. And George and I got married and lived in McClenny for a while. Then we moved to Jacksonville because George worked at Swisher International, which is King Edward Cigars, 38 and a half years. And I worked there for 17 and a half. So we moved to Jacksonville. The worst mistake we ever made. That's a crazy place. And we finally got able to move back to McClenny or Glen St. Mary. And we had a little farm, and we loved it. I didn't like the drive back and to. So I worked for a time at the school, and because my school teachers was good buddies of mine. I did not finish school in the 11th. In the end of the 11th grade, I decided I'd rather get married and have babies. So I did that. Well, when we moved back to McClenny, I went back and took the GED and never did go back to take the test. The teacher, Mr. Clutter, stayed. Of course, he's dead now, but every time he would see me, he would get on to me about taking the test. But I didn't want to do nothing that I needed that. I like to cook and to sew, and then I established my own sewing shop. George built me a building, and when he went to work at 5:30 in the morning, I went out the back door to my sewing shop, and I made everything from ball gowns to Halloween costumes, and just had a wonderful time doing that. And then I worked in the garden. We always had a garden, and I remember the day I picked 13 bushels of butter beans.
That's a lot of butter beans.
That's a lot of butter beans.
Then you shell them all?
No, George when he comes home from work the next morning, he took them to his job and he sold them. He said one lady fussed because he charged her $26. He said, "I'm not charging you for the beans. I'm charging you for my wife having to pick them." So that's the kind of feller he was. He was a lot of fun, and he had a sweet little mama and 4 brothers when I got to know him. And
how did you meet?
We met at Swisher. He was a superintendent there, and all the women was after him, but I won. When we lived in Jacksonville, George or I, either one, had never joined a church. He was Baptist and I went to the Methodist. But he had 2 cousins that belonged to the Advent Christian Church in Jacksonville where Warren Rivenbark was preaching. And so we decided to go with them. And we did. And Warren baptized our family. And
then you had children?
Yeah, well, then George and I had one because he already had 2 and I had 2. We had one boy, Steve. And and we liked it. The big difference is I had been to so many funerals in my hometown where my friends and my cousins and my uncles and aunts, big family. My grandmother had 13 children. She had 10, and she left her husband, Grandpa Joe, up in Georgia and got a man with a mule and wagon to bring her and her 9 children and her pregnant with the 10th one to Florida. My little grandma, she only weighed about 85 pounds. Well, after she moved to Florida, she met this man that had 10 children, and they got married. Well, that was not enough. They had 3 together. That gave us 23. We had a wonderful big family. We was always together on the weekends. But anyway, back to my story of the Advent Christian denomination. We stayed with the Springfield Church in Jacksonville until we decided to move back to McClenny. And we bought this little farmhouse, 10 acres of land, and moved there. And then some of our friends decided they wanted to move to McClenny. So they bought a piece of land there. There was a mom and daddy and their 2 daughters. And we started a church at Glen, the Blessed Hope Advent Christian Church, with Pastor Joe Tom Tate, who was president of the conference at one time. And he was a jolly good, he was so much fun. But he would preach at the Springfield Church in the mornings at 11, but he would come and preach for us at 9 and then drive back to Jacksonville. And we had different preachers after he retired. Ben Tibbetts, I didn't think to remember all of their names. Anyway, there was different ones. Howard Shaw even came and preached for us. And then Frank Lupo, which is our Patty that lives here now, her husband. And that's where we were at when Frank died. I was with Patty the morning we went when he fell on the floor in Winn-Dixie, because we lived right across the street from the church, although it was country. And we stayed, Patty and I stayed until they took him to Jacksonville to the hospital. And we called the family And then George got off of work and stayed with Frank until some of the family could get there. Well, he never revived. 11 days. And I could say more about that, but I won't. But anyway, Patty got ready to move to the village after then. And then we had another lady that she and her brother died, and she moved to the village. Mary Clower, you probably didn't never get to know her. She was a sweet lady. She died in December, and George died in January. But she was a wonderful lady. And after all of that, one day we was sitting in the field picking butter beans, and I had mentioned to George about moving to the village. Well, it just went one in one ear and out the other. But we went to Daytona Beach and spent a week, and we coming home, he says, I think that we do need to move to the village. And I thought he had lost his mind because the way he'd been talking. And I didn't say nothing about it. And later on, one morning, we were picking butter beans, and he said, we got to be two of the craziest people in the world. I says, what do you mean? He says, out here picking these old butter beans, and we don't have to do this. Let's go to the village. So we came to the village and bought the piece of property and built a house. And the church, the little Blessed Hope Advent Christian Church, closed up because the other couple was not well. But we did a lot of good there. There was 2 families that we basically supported for 5 years because they needed help. And there was 5 or 6 people that got baptized. And but we built our house and moved here. And I thought, oh boy, this is going to be fun. I'm going to work in the house, and George can keep up the yards. Well, guess what? He found a garden spot over at the barn, and he started farming again. But anyway, I'm still here, and there's a lot of love here, and I feel it since he died. And especially when my son died last year, and still. So I don't know how much longer the Lord has for me, but
none of us know that, do we?
We don't know. It'll be a good day.
That's right.
But I'm still going to be an Advent Christian because, when I was growing up, I went to all these funerals of my classmates, my cousins, my uncles, aunts. And we had one man out there that did most all the funerals of the old country folks. And he always got people right on up in heaven. And I knew that some of my classmates was not living like they ought to. And I thought, well, how can this be? But he managed to get them up there. And the first time that Warren Rivenbark talked about the sleep of the dead, that's what sold us on the Advent Christian denomination. And it was a good... I was telling them of course, Warren Rivenbark has died, but his wife, Mildred, is still living. And we talk at least every 2 weeks. And she lives in a big old house. She's invited me to come live with her, but I'm not leaving Florida. And but I would like to go see her again. I went and spent a week with her. One of my sons took me to see her. But she says I'm the only friend she ever had. And I thought, you can't say that being a preacher's wife. You got to have more than one friend. She might mean that I'm the only one that'll talk to her for an hour on the phone.
On a regular basis.
On a regular basis.
Dollie, tell us a little bit about some of your childhood memories.
You know, one of my grandsons said to me this week, this was Steve's son, Wade, and he's got 4 girls, and this is more than my, but anyway, those girls write to me. They keep me busy writing to them. And one of them says, Granny, my daddy said you cook the best beef roast and biscuits in the world. Now, my daddy makes biscuits and my mama does the beef, but they need help. Send recipes. Well, I don't have a recipe for that. But we just grew up where we was, and I was talking with their daddy, and he said, Granny, I remember coming to your house, and maybe you and Papa was sitting down to eat, and we just walked in, and you said, come on, sit down and eat. Well, you just had enough there for you and Papa, but you started opening the refrigerator and doors, and directly the table was full of food. You was always prepared to fix. And we did that. On Sunday morning, I got up and cooked dinner. This was after George and I was married. And I never knew how many was coming. In fact, one lady that was a cousin of my mama's, she went to the Baptist church in McClenny. And after church, she would say, we're going to George and Dollie's for dinner. Y'all want to go? And she'd bring a carload. And it was that way at home. We had a long old table, almost as long as this porch here, in the yard, and that's where we ate. We ate. Mama didn't have that many plates. We ate in tin pans and coffee can lids and whatever. But we lived close to the river, and we always had fish. And we'd go to the river and stay in the river the whole weekend. Catch fish. We always had grits because we grew our corn. I learned to shoot guns, to play a lot of games that my uncles taught me to play. And so I had a wonderful life. Sweet mom and daddy. I never heard my mom and daddy say a cross word to each other. That it just was not there. My daddy ended up having a stroke before he died, and him and Mama would always go to the nursing home after church on Sunday. They went to church with us. After we'd eat dinner, they'd go to the nursing home, and the next time I'd see Daddy, it might even be Sunday evening, he might come back because we were real close. He'd say, if you ever put me in there, I won't last 2 weeks. So when he had the stroke, Daddy was not going to the nursing home. He couldn't talk. He could only use his left arm. And I waited on him. I was either there or I had somebody there. And my mother died in the middle of that. And when she died, I moved him to my house, and he lived 16 more months. And but it was a wonderful, wonderful time, even waiting on him. He couldn't talk, but I could figure out what he wanted.
Because you were so close for so long.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think they're telling me I need to shut up.
Not yet. Dollie, once you moved to the village and George started farming, you got pretty involved in volunteer work. Would you tell us about that?
Well, I had to be doing something. And I still I loved going to Good Sam, because when I was 9 years old, I went and lived with my grandma and grandpa, my mama's mom and daddy, for a time, because grandma was sick, and I helped them out. I said to my daughter not long ago, I said, you know, if there had been money that I could have gone to college or school and learned to be a nurse, I would have liked to done that. She says, Mama, you was a nurse. And I never thought about it like that. She says, when you took care of Grandma and then your Grandma and Grandpa, she said, you was a nurse. And because there wasn't anything you could do for Daddy except just see that he ate. And if you ever seen a man that loved grits, he ate grits and Vienna sausage 3 times a day.
Well, it was easy to plan the menu.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I know you've been active at the village church as a volunteer.
Yeah.
And you're a deacon now, is it?
I'm a deacon. I've been that for 16 years. I think that after the last 3 years that I've had pneumonia 3 times, and last year I almost died, and the first of this year again, I need to step aside and let somebody else do it. And so I'm going to try that. I tried it last year and it didn't work, but I'm going to try it again this year. But I love people because I grew up. I have one school teacher left. Her name is Mary Finley. She was Mary McAlpin. She was a home ec teacher. She wanted so bad for me to be a home ec teacher, but I just went another route. And I go to see her when I go to my clinic. She's 91 or I think she'll be 92 this year. And I told her, I said, I know that I disappointed you. She said, no, you didn't. She said, you have gone far and done more than a lot of these that has a college education. So I felt proud of her for saying that. And I got to know her daddy. He was J.W. McAlpin, which was a representative in Tallahassee, named after the little town McAlpin. And she is a wonderful lady. She taught us to cook. I remember the first thing she taught us to cook, and she taught me to sew, and we made a candlestick salad. You ever made candlestick salad?
If I have. I didn't know it was called that. Tell us about it.
You just put a piece of lettuce on a plate. You cut a banana in half and put a little hole in the top side, and put some mayonnaise there, and put that banana in that hole, and with that mayonnaise, and then you put some more mayonnaise on top with a red cherry, and you got candlestick.
Yes, I've never made it. Well, Dolly, who taught you to make your famous coconut cake?
I combined 2 recipes. I was to do my George's nephew, actually, wedding that was down in Gainesville, and they wanted cake, a 3-layer cake, and then the groom's cake was red velvet, and it was 20 by 20, 3 layers. It was Christmas time, so I did green and red and green, or red, green, and red, whatever. But it was 3 colors. And we put that in the back of the truck and took it to Gainesville. I was not happy with my bride's cake. It turned out okay, but it didn't seem to have the strength to hold, because I didn't know what Cheryl had. She was going to use her mama's toppings that her mama had on, and I hadn't seen them. I didn't know what I was faced with when I got down there. I took icing to put there. Anyway, so when I got home, I went to work on my cake recipe to make it stiffer. And then the icing I stole from my aunt that goes on the coconut cake.
Well, that's legendary here at the village. And I know you've won best in a lot of baking contests with it. And anybody who has it will say, "Ooh, yes, that is the best."
The last one of those cakes that got auctioned off, and this was at the Wise Old Owls at Campolina, where my brother belongs to. This is FFA and agriculture teachers. I go down there. Brought $50, and I thought, "That's so easy to make, so easy." But I love to cook, and now just for me.
Dolly, what advice would you give a young person today, or have you shared with your grandchildren?
Learn to cook, and learn to say yes ma'am or yes sir, no matter if you agree with them or not. When you get older, you will understand. You don't understand now, but you will when you get older. And my daughter is taking care of her little 6-year-old now, and she's going to school. And I've told her, she's been giving her a spank on the hand. I said, no, it's time to stop that. She's too old to be spanked. Give her something to remember. She's not going to remember that. 2 minutes. I said, give her something to remember about. She says, what's that? I said, a naughty chair. I had 5 of mine here at one time, and I had 5 chairs in different places, and they all had their names on them. And if they misbehaved, I pointed to their chair, and they sit there till I told them they could get up. They remember that. They don't remember that pat on the hand. Kids need to be disciplined.
Yes, they do. But lovingly and...
Yeah. I remember Travis Carter, this was Pomeroy's brother. He came to our church at Springfield one time. He did behavioral science, and he told us, he said, I was leaving Dowling Park, coming to Jacksonville, and I saw this sign on this church. It was in Live Oak. I got to say this. Says, love hell out of people. He said, and I stopped and backed up and thought, did I really read what I thought I read? And he said, yep, it was there. And he says, I sit there until it came to me, how else are you going to get it out? You can't beat it out. You got to love it out. And that's what we need to be doing as a community, as Christ's children.
Nation, yes.
I got some folks that live across the street from me, don't go to church.
Well, we all can keep praying for each other.
That's right. That's what we have to do.
That's right. Well, Dollie, thank you so much for sitting down with me. Here we have 2 Florida crackers on the porch, and that's pretty normal for here, or abnormal for here. We have not many Floridians that are members here at the village.
Yeah, so. That's true. Yeah. Well, I don't know if I said the right things or not, but anyway.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for asking me.
And thank you for joining us today. I hope you tune in again. And just before we are ending this in review, we get to hear the crickets this morning. Take care and bye-bye.